So it's the day of. I didn't even consider. I was expecting the sheriff to call me and tell me what was up. The decision of what's going to happen. Apparently, it's going to happen in like 45 minutes. But somebody suggested, one of the newscasters suggested, they were like, "Hey, are you going to be down there?" And I didn't even realize. I was like, "Oh, I can." Because I was like, I don't know. People want my reaction, and I'm like, how am I going to react if I don't know what the fuck is going on? I was like, it's going to be televised or broadcast, and I don't think it is. It's just a sheriff's press conference. So I'm here to watch it live in person and see what happens. All right, here we go. So I've been talking to a bunch of reporters here for the last hour, basically. I wanted to go in there. They're doing a press briefing right now. I wanted to go in and be a part of that. They said that they didn't want me in the press briefing. I'm not sure why. I told them I was an independent journalist, and I wondered if that was sufficient enough, but that apparently was not sufficient enough to be in the meeting with the press. I feel like we could have fast forwarded a lot of stuff if I was just allowed to be in there, you know what I mean? But that's okay. She's agreed to meet with me afterward, so apparently her and her, I think, chief of staff, I'll get the details there, are going to meet with me afterward to talk about it. And I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, hopefully. See how much time they give me. Obviously, it's her meeting, so to speak, so we'll see. This is overwhelming.
So I just got back from the sheriff's office because today, they announced yesterday, Sunday, April, whatever, I got a bunch of information from reporters that they were planning on doing a press conference today, Monday. So that isn't much time to prepare, really. But I just got back now. My biggest challenge right now is trying not to have a reactionary perspective towards this entire situation. If you watch this video and you let me convince you of one thing, that one thing should be not to allow the King County Sheriff's Department to martyr Richard Rowe and to make this into being about him, because it is not at all about Richard the Detective Rowe. It is not about him. If you're confused by that, that's okay, because that's how the system being Sheriff's Department, the systems being law enforcement officers, this being the Baltimore PD or the Chicago PD, or wherever policies are being enforced incorrectly, wherever policies are being built and abused, where people are being protected in order to protect the system itself from change. That is the real problem, not the person. I'm going to talk about something I'm going to publish here. I'm going to talk about the news reporting. I'm going to talk about everything that's going to happen up to this point, and then I'm going to talk about what the next steps are. This is a bigger deal than I had expected by a lot. Apparently a lot of people are invested in this, which I am glad about. I'm glad that there are a lot of people who want to see something come of this, who want to be optimistic about there being change, who want to be protected from something like this. The way that it went down was that all the reporters were brought into a room and read a statement, and then they got some questions, probably about 30 minutes. Then they offered up to bring me into the room, talk to me one-on-one with me and the Sheriff Mitzi Johanknick and a woman by the name of Liz, something I believe is a chief of staff. I didn't catch it. I should verify that. They brought all the reporters in, and they read a statement. They decided to suspend the detective for 5 days and provide some sort of training. I don't actually know, because I didn't get a copy of that yet. I met the sheriff and I met Liz, and I apologized. I mentioned, I think, that I had on Twitter that I felt like I kind of like ambushed her at her own coronation. I felt bad about that, and she wasn't concerned about it, so good. But that was not my intent. But I just wanted to emphasize that this was important to me. I mean, I asked them if they had any specific statement. They didn't seem to have any specific statement, which is fine. So I just had questions, and I had a lot of questions. And if you've seen my stuff, if you've seen the videos I make, if you've seen my third video, I mean, I had 23 minutes worth of questions and concerns about a document. Well, I had a lot more today, too, clarifying on that. I probably could have answered questions back and forth for an hour or two. I didn't have an hour. I had about 15 minutes, which I didn't really realize until I was going to be punted out of the room. Which is fine. People have shit to do. So I asked the sheriff how they got to the perspective, because the biggest concern I had, the biggest thing I emailed them back and forth about was how. How did they say that pointing a gun at somebody isn't force? And they proceed to explain to me that basically, in summary, that short of pulling the trigger, they don't consider drawing and pointing a gun at somebody force. They acknowledged when I asked them about the reverse, being a critical stress incident, a civilian drawing a gun against an officer, that would be assault in the 3rd degree. They acknowledged that. I then asked if she thought that their use of force policy needed to change to become in line with something closer to like SPD. SPD, the Seattle Police Department, specifically states that drawing and pointing a weapon at somebody is use of deadly force. There's kind of a generic use of force continuum that they use to build policies and procedures off of for these law enforcement organizations that describes force going from an officer arriving on the scene to them shooting their pistol at somebody or their service weapon at somebody. And there's a big plethora of differences in between there of like lines that you're supposed to go through to get to different levels. They were really defensive about that idea. When I pointed out that other organizations had different use of force policies that included that, the statement was basically, well, we don't have to do that, and we're not them. And that was frustrating because that wasn't the question I was asking. The question I asked was, do they think it should change? Because my perspective is coming from that of somebody that expects that this organization exists to keep people safe. That's my perspective. And I don't think that they have that perspective. I think that when you are in these organizations, it seems like they see it differently. They see it from a perspective of what do they need to do? What do they have to do? That's where they're coming from. And then, we really kind of went back and forth. She explained to me that Rowe was very apologetic about what happened. He felt really bad about it. A lot of apparently negative things that happened to him and his family. I can empathize with that. This is, again, part of the reason why I say this is not about the detective. This has nothing to do with him. So if you are looking to exert any type of frustration on him, you are pointing it in the wrong direction. That is not where your frustration should go. He has been attacked apparently via online, via the internet, via whatever. I believe that because people have attacked me in the exact same way. I can commiserate with him that there's people on a variety of areas of political and social boundaries on what they think is right, probably attacking this person. And they shouldn't, because that's not right. That's not it. And again, that is misinterpreting. It is not his fault that he got a 5-day suspension. It is not his fault that he was not terminated for what he did. It is not his fault that he has poor firearm handling skills. It is the system's fault. It is King County Sheriff's Office fault for not ensuring that he had the proper training and he was put in the right position to do it. So they explained to me that he was very apologetic, which was, I emphasize that did not come out in the findings report that I had read. It seemed like he kind of just lied about a bunch of stuff. And they said that he wasn't coached by the union to say any of those things. Whatever. Those documents will come out. Those recordings will come out. I fully intend to get all of that and listen to all of that information. As I was being essentially saying, hey, we got other meetings, we got to go, I said, okay, well, let me give the 2 suggestions. And the use of force thing I suggest you look into. I would suggest something change with that, because that seems crazy to me, and it seems crazy to your constituency. The second thing I suggested was that they build some sort of policy around unmarked patrol cars or officers conducting traffic stops, because a lot of what happened would not have happened had a marked patrol car come and interacted with me. We wouldn't be here if something like that happened if he had simply used his radio instead of conducting the stop. Many people mentioned this in my comments. If somebody was confused and thought that I was being robbed, which was not an unreasonable estimation, either one of us could have been hurt. There's no reason for this. There is no reason to have that level of confusion. So my suggestion was to put in some sort of policy where unless there is a violent action that officer is seeing, somebody is being assaulted, somebody is being threatened, somebody is being physically attacked or hurt, that they should not conduct a traffic stop. If that means that King County Sheriff's Office writes less speeding tickets, less tickets about people being in the HOV lane when there's only one person, less improper lane change, not using your blinker, whatever, then I think that that's the right choice. I think that that's the correct policy. That was my suggestion. When I made that suggestion, Liz looked at me and said, hey, you do realize though, forgive me, this is going to be the part where my emotion is probably not going to be in check. This is the part that I'm not going to really be able to contain my frustration and my anger. Liz looked at me and said, you realize that this wouldn't have happened if you wouldn't have been driving this way. That your driving led to him doing this thing, and you made a mistake, and then he made a mistake, and that led us here. And I said, are you really going to victim blame me for this? I do not see those things as equatable at all. I do not see misdemeanor speeding as the equivalent to drawing and pointing a gun at somebody. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my perspective is wrong. Maybe the way I see and perceive these things and what I think is right is wrong. I don't fucking think so, though. I think she is wrong. I think that attitude is wrong. And that is what I saw, is that is the problem with the structure. That is what I mean. They see this as he made a little bit of a mistake. But you know what? If you would have kept your shit together, if you wouldn't have triggered him, we wouldn't have been here. And then she looked at me and she said, all that stuff you say out to those reporters is just going to inflame and going to make everything worse. So she was trying to stop me from explaining facts. She said that the truth is too inflammatory. Well, maybe they should make a change. Maybe those 2 policy instructions that I just provided would make a change. But they don't want to change. They want to say, this guy made a mistake, 5 days, don't worry about it, won't happen again. That is not correct. They do not want to do the work to put the policy together. And that's a problem. That's the issue. That is what we should all be angry about. That is what we should be fighting for in King County, in Baltimore, in Texas, everywhere. Everywhere that this exists. This is an America problem. This is a United States problem. This is a law enforcement problem. This is not a problem with individuals. This is a problem with structure. That is what we need to fix. That is what we need to push for. How do we do it? We do it by partnering with organizations like De-Escalate Washington. They have put together actual policy to get stuff changed, to get stuff fixed. That is the right choice. That is how we do it. I had 4 reform suggestions. The first was to amend the King County Sheriff's Department's General Orders Manual to explicitly state that pointing a gun at someone is a use of deadly force. Unmarked cars and plainclothes cops should not conduct traffic stops until an effective policy is built out and trained, rather than having carte blanche to do whatever they want, whenever they want. I-940 should be enacted to require more de-escalation, mental health crisis, first aid, and require independent investigation of deadly force claims. This is currently in process by De-Escalate Washington. I don't know what the policy is for King County Sheriff's Department and how they track red flags for people, but it is clearly not sufficient to identify people that are potentially going to have these types of incidents prior to getting there. So that needs a review. The stranger was able to find, and I was able to go see and look, that this looks to me as from an external perspective, something that is not a part of these departments, it looks to me like this was going to culminate in something like what happened with me. They should come up with some sort of remediation strategy to fix it. I don't know if they need to retire earlier. I don't know if they need to have some sort of custom training. Maybe they need more vacation time. I don't know. It could be additional benefits. It could be required. I don't know what it could be, but it should be assessed and reviewed. A thing I want to talk about too that is incredibly important is Graham v. Connor. Graham v. Connor is essentially what our current deadly force policy in all law enforcement comes down to. This was mentioned in the initial findings and proceedings document I read in the 3rd update. I am 100% not equipped to give you a detailed explanation of Graham v. Connor. Please, if this at all interests you, please educate yourself and listen to the more perfect episode on Graham v. Connor. DeThorne Graham was a black man who had diabetes. He asked a friend of his to drive him to a convenience store to get some orange juice. He wanted to go get the orange juice so that he could consume it, which would prevent him from having a diabetic seizure. Upon going to the convenience store, he tried to check out, but the line was really long, so he just went back in the car and wanted to leave. When that happened, another officer saw him, Connor, saw him, and started tailing them, basically. Eventually, Graham gets out of his car. he got out of his car, started walking around the car, and then finally laid on the ground and proceeded to start to have a seizure. The two officers picked him up and put him in handcuffs and essentially beat the shit out of him, more or less, before finally putting him in the squad car, not charging him with anything because he didn't do anything. They called the convenience store to try and see if he had caused a problem, and he didn't. So they finally let him go. And then this eventually led to this whole series of court rulings that finally got to the Supreme Court. Prior to Graham v. Connor, the standard that we held police accountable to was malicious intent. You had to prove that you had to get into an officer's brain and prove that they had malicious intents to hurt you. I want to play a small snippet from the Supreme Court by Thurgood Marshall, who is questioning the attorney for Connor about why they put him in handcuffs.
Well, one justice, Thurgood Marshall, the lone African-American on the court, comes in and just asks,
what reason was there for handcuffing a diabetic in a coma?
Well, at the time, the officers didn't know that he was a diabetic in a coma.
What was he doing that was so violent that he had to be handcuffed?
You have to go back one step even before that. Officer Connor saw a petitioner act in a very suspicious and unusual manner. Hurry into a convenience store. Well, it wasn't clear. He saw him hurry into a convenience store.
Well, what did he do that was violent?
Excuse me?
What did he do that was violent?
After the Supreme Court decision, they came up with this thing called the reasonable officer. And since then, that has been the standard for deadly force. Now, what's interesting is they actually sent Connor back to the lower courts, and he actually lost that case anyway. They still didn't consider that unreasonable force, even though he was beat the fuck up and put in handcuffs. So he actually still lost. I'm emphasizing this to say that we still have a problem with this. This is the issue right now. Up until a month ago, in March, I believe March 8th, Washington State still had to prove malicious intent. We had the worst use of force standards as far as trying to hold officers accountable. Up until a month ago, we still adhered to that. I also want to bring attention to an article written by the Seattle Times in September 26th of 2015 called Shielded by the Law. If you live in the Seattle area, this is a really important article for you to read that has a lot of interest to you, where they talk a lot about our use of force policy and how it's protected people. They do some really great investigative journalism. Maybe that's part of the reason why the DA chose not to file charges against Officer Rowe. I'm going to reach back out to them. When I reached out to the DA because I complied with a criminal investigation, they immunized me from all traffic violations so that I was at no point going to be held accountable, and I could provide a truthful and accurate statement without fear of repercussions. I gave them my GoPro with the memory card to extract data forensically if they wanted to try to confirm or deny mine or Rowe's claims. They eventually just gave me my memory card back and didn't really explain to me anything. They didn't explain to me if they pulled data off of it. They didn't explain to me what they saw. They didn't explain any reasoning about it. They told me once the sheriff made her response that should answer my questions, but it really didn't. So I'll be reaching back out to them. I don't expect to hear anything, but you can essentially say that he will not be held criminally accountable. That's not going to happen. Again, it's interesting because these are arms of the judicial system. These are arms of the system that are supposed to hold each other accountable, but it doesn't really feel like they're entirely independent. It kind of feels like they're working together to come up with solutions or to come up with final decisions. To me, let's talk about the civil suit. Because they seem completely uninterested in considering policy changes, I will definitely be going forward with a civil suit. I've already got a lawyer lined up, the same lawyer I've been working with already. So what's interesting about this is normally with these civil suits, if he had broken just state law, I would have been required to go to a state court. And that has concerns for me around the same problem with the DA and the King County, is that how do I know that they're fully independent? It doesn't really usually seem like they are, and there could be bias towards those structures, towards those powers. But he didn't violate just state law. He violated my constitutional rights, my Fourth Amendment rights. That's a federal law. So we get to go to federal court, and a federal court is generally going to be less nepotistic to protect and have bias towards the structures that exist of the state. So that's really good news. How long? Well, realistically, it's probably 16 months before we're in court. So that'll put me in the middle of fucking 2020. At this point, I don't see how Rowe is not a significant liability. As far as having concerns about him, if he has ever brought in any type of investigation or as a witness for something, I think his testimony is pretty much worthless at this point. They're going to point at this and they're going to show a jury what happened, and there is just no way that he is going to be a credible witness. So I don't think we need to worry about that. Hopefully this has been enough. I believe that this has probably been enough for him. He will probably never make a mistake like this again. I don't know about anyone else, but not him. But the biggest thing we can do, even if they won't change policy, is we can make them, with the civil suit, I can make them answer some really uncomfortable questions about inconsistencies in their policies, about inconsistencies in allowing a detective to lie and to support that lie, and how they hold deputies accountable for their actions. That's the biggest thing. And that, truthfully, that may be the only thing that comes of it, other than maybe some small settlement. And if that's where we get, my hope is then that can lead to policy. If you feel anger, if you feel like this isn't right, then you need to channel it. You need to turn it into something productive. Commenting on this YouTube video, that's not going to create real change. If you want to create real change, here is what you do. Donate to progressive organizations. There are a variety of them. Donating your money is fine. If you're like me and you have more money than time, do that. ACLU, De-Escalate Washington, Think Progress, the Sanders Institute. There's a variety of them. Do your own research. I'm not an expert on these things, but find somebody who is. If you do have the time, volunteer with these programs. Offer your help. Offer to get signatures. Offer to call. Contact your local legislators. Again, I'm going to leave the ones here for Washington State, so if you're a Seattleite or if you're in Washington or if you're in King County and you're invested in this, I'm going to give you the contact info below. Realistically, there's probably not going to be enough for me to talk about until the civil case is underway. If this is what you've been watching my YouTube channel for, this is probably a goodbye for you and me. I hope that I've encouraged some of you watching these to do something in your own community and to make a change in your own community. If I don't win a civil suit, I will still be okay with this if at least some of you that watch this, who've watched this tens of thousands of times or hundreds of thousands of times, walk away with the intent to make a change. As overwhelming as it has been, I also want to thank the reporters that have looked into this and that have taken this seriously. Again, without publication, without informing people of what's going on, these institutions would love for them to just slide under the rug without having any type of press or any information, because an informed populace can ask for change. You, the person watching this, can ask for change because you know the questions to ask, because you realize the problems that exist. That's what they don't want. They want you to say, oh, this guy got charged, or oh, this guy got suspended. Justice was done. They don't want you to realize that massive injustice still exists. Thanks to everybody who has supported me, who've written nice things, who's emailed me privately in support. I really appreciate it. I wish you luck in any fight for change that you decide to take up. Thanks.